Have you ever heard of someone stealing a neighbor's boat in the middle of the night, then calling 911 on themselves, claiming the neighbor sabotaged them? This isn't a scene from a comedy, but a real story that happened at Pine Lake when Karen, the notoriously strict HOA president, turned a quiet night into the most absurd meltdown this neighborhood had ever seen. Just when you think it can't get crazier, Karen takes it to the next level, walking herself right into the trap she set for someone else. By the end of this story, you'll understand why the entire community cheered when Karen was finally arrested, and why sometimes karma wears a badge and shows up exactly when it should. Jake Mitchell, 38, didn't know that sipping his coffee on the porch that morning, watching the mist roll off Pine Lake, would be his last truly peaceful moment for a while. For him, Pine Lake was paradise, a place where he could commute to work across the lake in his boat Thunderbolt, instead of wasting hours stuck in city traffic. But for Karen, 62, Pine Lake wasn't paradise, it was her kingdom. The HOA president for 8 years, she believed her mission was to enforce every rule with an iron grip, from noise restrictions to aesthetic uniformity. She had been a librarian before her husband Harold died, leaving her with the largest house on the lake, and nothing to do but manage everyone else's business. It all started with what seemed like a harmless, welcome letter from Karen, a 12-page document with highlighted HOA rules Jake should review thoroughly. He chuckled, filed it away, and assumed that was the end of it. But by the second week, Karen filed her first complaints. Boat engine was too loud in the mornings, allegedly exceeding 65 dB. Jake checked his manual, 58 dB at idle, well within limits, and politely emailed Karen back with the exact specs, thinking this would clear things up. Karen didn't care about facts. By the third week, Karen filed another complaint claiming Jake's boat was docked 3.2 feet past the approved line. She included photos from multiple angles, complete with a measuring tape in each shot. Jake checked, and once again he was within the regulations. The fourth week's complaint was the most ridiculous. Karen claimed Jake's life jacket hanging on his balcony violated community aesthetics. She cited Section 4.7, which, upon reading, Jake discovered was about lawn furniture, not safety equipment. At first, Jake tried to stay polite, thinking he could reason with Karen, but Karen didn't want cooperation, she wanted control. She wasn't trying to protect the community, she was trying to rule it. And then came the infamous photo incident. One morning, Jake spotted Karen hiding behind a tree with a massive telephoto lens, attempting to get evidence of his boat's activities like she was on a wildlife documentary stakeout. Jake, instead of getting angry, waved and yelled, "Good morning, Karen! Beautiful day for photography." Karen, startled, tripped over her tripod and fell into the shallow water, drenching herself in her expensive camera. Jake, ever the good neighbor, helped her up and retrieved her dripping camera from the water. "Thank you?" Karen muttered, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Jake handed her the camera, grinning. Must be some fascinating wildlife. Neighbors peeked out their windows, stifling laughter as Karen sloshed back to her house, humiliated. But Karen wasn't done. Later that month, she organized a HOA meeting titled, "The Jake Mitchell Problem, a Threat to Community Standards." Only 12 people showed up, but Karen presented a 47-point slideshow filled with noise complaints, boat measurements, and screenshots of Jake's alleged violations. Jake let her finish before calmly pulling out the HOA charter, flipping to each relevant section, and debunking every single point in front of the room. "You think you're so smart with your loopholes," Karen snapped. "They're not loopholes, Karen. They're the actual rules." Neighbors started murmuring in agreement, and for the first time in years, Karen realized she was losing control. That night, Jake added new features to his boat's app: live GPS tracking, remote engine shut-off, and camera feeds. Karen thought she was preparing to escalate, but Jake was preparing too. And then, it happened. At 2:00 a.m., Karen, dressed in black, used a spare key Jake had accidentally left on the boat, and took Thunderbolt out onto the lake, believing she was finally going to teach Jake a lesson. But what Karen didn't know was that Jake was watching her every move on his phone, ready to end her midnight joyride with a single tap. It was 2:00 a.m. The lake was a mirror under the moonlight, quiet except for the rumble of Jake's speedboat, Thunderbolt, slicing through the water. But Jake wasn't at the wheel. Karen was. She had spent the last week spiraling, obsessed with Jake, convinced he was mocking her, convinced he was destroying the community she protected. She had tried complaints, threats, and even hiring Jerry, a sketchy, private investigator, to catch Jake in the act of something, anything. When that failed, Karen decided she'd take matters into her own hands. She found the spare key Jake accidentally left on the boat's seat after maintenance. And in her mind, this was the moment she would finally teach him respect. "Let's see how you like losing something you care about," Karen muttered, gripping the wheel. The engine roared beneath her, vibrating through the deck, powerful and alive. For a fleeting moment, Karen felt unstoppable. The lake was hers, the night was hers, and the speed made her feel like she was young again. Back when she and Harold would take their boat out for dawn fishing trips, she pushed the throttle forward. 20 miles for third, 40 miles, the wind ripped past her, cold on her face, pulling tears from her eyes, mixing with the thrill of doing something reckless. For once, she wasn't the one enforcing the rules. She was breaking them. "This is what power feels like," she shouted over the engine, throwing her head back and laughing. But while Karen was having the ride of her life, Jake was watching everything from a secure live feed in his friend Mike's apartment. He sipped coffee, phone in hand, tracking her every move on the GPS map as Thunderbolt carved circles into Pine Lake. He almost felt sorry for her, seeing the glee on her face in the moonlight, seeing the ghost of the woman she used to be before power and loneliness consumed her almost. But Karen had crossed a line. This wasn't a petty HOA complaint or a misfiled violation notice. This was grand theft. Jake texted Sam, the local police captain and Jake's college buddy. "Jakey, she's in the boat. She's flying across the lake." Sam let her. Let her feel like she's won, then. Ended, "I'm in position." Jake watched the speed climb on his app. 45 miles, 48 miles, 50 miles. Karen was screaming into the night, hair whipping around her face, convinced she was finally in control. Jake whispered almost to himself, "Showtime." At exactly 1:27 m, Jake pressed a single button on his phone. Inji and Kyle. Thunderbolt's engine died instantly. The loud roar was replaced by eerie silence as the boat's momentum carried it forward, slowing as it coasted across the dark water. Karen, caught off guard, almost flew over the console, grabbing the wheel to steady herself. "What the hell?" she screamed, twisting the key in the ignition, pumping the throttle, hitting the console with her fists. Nothing. The boat rocked gently as it drifted, surrounded by nothing but water and darkness. The shoreline was a distant line under the moonlight. Karen's adrenaline drained, replaced with a cold, creeping fear. The reality of what she had done started to settle in. She was alone in the middle of the lake, in a stolen boat, in the dead of night. She pulled out her phone, shaking, and stared at the screen. Who could she call? She couldn't call Jake. She couldn't call a neighbor. She couldn't call the HOA. She couldn't even call her late husband Harold, who used to calm her down when she lost control. So she did the unthinkable. She dialed 911. 911. What is your emergency? Karen took a deep breath and launched into her performance. "Help! I'm stranded on Pine Lake! My neighbor, Jake Mitchell, sabotaged his boat while I was using it, and now I'm stuck out here, and I'm scared he's going to hurt me." She spun a wild story about Jake, letting her borrow the boat, about him, remotely shutting it down, about how she was afraid for her life. She didn't realize the 911 call was being recorded. She didn't know Sam was already on his way. Blue lights off, gliding across the water in the police boat. She didn't know Jake was listening, shaking his head. And she had no idea that her midnight joyride was about to become the most public humiliation of her life. At 2:00 a.m., under the cold moonlight of Pine Lake, Karen sat trembling in the driver's seat of Thunderbolt, her hands clutching the wheel, the boat drifting silently as the engine lay dead beneath her. What had felt like power moments ago was now replaced with icy fear. The water was dark, the shoreline distant, and for the first time in a long time, Karen felt completely alone. She pulled out her phone, took a shaky breath, and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Karen steadied her voice, ready to deliver her performance. "I need help. I'm stranded in the middle of Pine Lake, and I think my neighbor Jake Mitchell sabotaged my boat. I can't get back to shore. I think he's trying to hurt me." The operator's tone was calm. "Mom, how did you end up in the middle of the lake?" Karen's mind raced. She needed the story to stick. "Jake let me borrow his boat earlier, but now he's using some app to shut it down remotely. He's been harassing me for months, and now he's doing this." She forced a sob, letting her voice break, hoping the tears would sound genuine. "We're dispatching Marine Patrol immediately, ma'am. Stay calm." Karen ended the call and let out a breath, whispering to herself, "That's it. That'll teach him. Let the police handle him now." But what Karen didn't know was that Jake, monitoring the police scanner, had heard every word. Sam, Pine Lake's police captain and Jake's friend, was already steering a patrol boat towards her position. On the lake, the flashing lights of Sam's patrol boat pierced the darkness, approaching Thunderbolt. Karen's eyes widened, relief and anxiety colliding in her chest. "Ma'am, this is Officer Sam Brooks. We're here to bring you back to shore safely." Karen wasted no time, launching into her narrative. "Thank God you're here! Jake Mitchell did this!" He shut off the engine remotely. "He's trying to kill me?" Sam simply nodded, his professional calm hiding the fact that he knew exactly what was really happening. "Let's get you on board first. Ma'am, we'll talk about it at the station." Karen stepped onto the patrol boat, casting one last bitter look at Thunderbolt bobbing quietly in the moonlight. At 3:00 a.m., inside the Pine Lake Precinct's small interrogation room, Karen wrapped herself in a thin blanket, a cold cup of coffee untouched in front of her. Sam sat across from her, a folder resting on the table between them. "Karen, I need you to walk me through everything that happened tonight." Karen clasped her hands, her voice quivering but her mind calculating every word. "Jake Mitchell has been harassing me for months. Tonight, I borrowed his boat with his permission, but he used his phone to shut it down while I was out on the lake. I could have died out there?" Sam nodded slowly. "Do you have any messages, emails, or witnesses confirming Jake gave you permission to take his boat?" Karen's throat tightened. She hadn't prepared for this level of questioning. It was a verbal agreement at the HOA meeting last week. Sam opened the folder. Inside were photos, GPS logs, and security footage stills from Jake's cameras. "Karen, these images show you sneaking onto Jake's dock, taking the spare key from the boat, and leaving with it at 1:15 a.m. There's no record of any agreement, and Jake's out-of-town alibi checks out." Karen's eyes darted, her mind scrambling. This was a setup!" Jake planted the key there, knowing I'd take it. Sam leaned forward, his eyes calm but firm. "Leaving your own key in your own boat isn't a crime, Karen. Taking a boat without permission is." Karen's voice rose, hysteria creeping in. "He's been undermining me, making me look like a fool!" "I was trying to protect the neighborhood." Sam didn't flinch. "Karen, you called 911 while sitting in a boat you stole, accusing Jake of trying to kill you. That's a false report and theft." Karen's shoulders slumped, her eyes filling with tears she could no longer control. At 4:00 a.m., Jake entered the precinct with quiet confidence, accompanied by his lawyer. Sam shook his hand, and gestured for him to sit. "Jake, Karen claims you gave her permission to use your boat, then shut it down remotely while she was on the lake." Jake looked genuinely baffled. "I never gave Karen permission to use my boat. The last conversation we had was at the HOA meeting when she was trying to find me for docking." Karen's head snapped up. "Liar! You left the key for me!" Jake glanced at Sam. Then calmly, "Karen, you found a key on my boat and decided to take it. That doesn't mean you had permission." Jake's lawyer placed a USB drive on the table. Here is the security footage showing exactly what happened. They watched as Karen appeared on the screen in dark clothes, sneaking onto the dock, taking the key, and leaving with Thunderbolt in the dead of night, a giddy smirk on her face as she sped off across the water. Karen's face drained of color, her mouth opening but no words coming out. Sam turned to her, his tone final. "Karen, you're under arrest for vehicle theft, filing a false police report, and reckless endangerment." She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality crashed over her. No, you can't do this to me." Sam simply replied, "Karen, you did this to yourself." The morning after Karen was arrested for stealing Jake's boat, Pine Lake buzzed with whispers, a soft hum of disbelief weaving through the manicured streets. Did she really get arrested? Karen, the HOA president? Unbelievable. Curtains twitched, phones lit up with neighborhood chat alerts, neighbors sharing snippets of the police report. Even those who had once trembled at the sight of Karen's clipboard felt a quiet, secret relief that morning, as if the weight pressing down on Pine Lake had lifted just a bit. Meanwhile, Karen sat alone in the holding cell, clutching her paper bag of personal items, her hair disheveled, mascara streaking down a face that was pale from exhaustion. Her eyes were empty, yet deep inside, she whispered to herself, "They can't treat me like this. I was protecting the community." In Karen's mind, Jake was still the problem, the troublemaker who challenged the order she had spent years building. She believed every rule she enforced, every complaint she filed, every cold glare she gave was her duty to preserve the peace of Pine Lake, even if that peace was only hers to define. When Karen was released later that afternoon, she found Mrs. Miller, Mrs. Henderson, and 3 HOA board members waiting outside, their faces calm but steely, the resolve of people who had quietly endured too much for too long. Miller's voice was quiet but firm. "Karen, there's an emergency meeting tonight. The community deserves answers." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but the words caught in her throat. She clutched her bag and walked past them into the harsh light of the afternoon, the gazes of neighbors peeking through blinds following her as she made the long walk home. That evening, the Pine Lake Community Center, usually half empty during HOA meetings, was packed. Residents filled every seat, papers in hand, the petition to remove Karen heavy in their laps. Jake sat in the back row, arms folded, a calm presence, while Sam in uniform stood nearby, ready to maintain order if Karen lost control. Karen stepped to the front, clutching a stack of papers, her hands trembling, her eyes tired but still carrying a flicker of the authority she once wielded so effortlessly. "Thank you for coming, everyone. I know there's been a misunderstanding." Her voice cracked as she tried to speak, but Mrs. Miller cut her off gently. "Karen, did you take Jake Mitchell's boat without permission and call 911 with false information?" Karen swallowed, her voice shaking. "I was protecting the community. Jake's boat was a nuisance, the noise, the violations." Mrs. Henderson stood, her voice slicing through the tension. "We saw the footage, Karen. You snuck down to the dock at 1:15 in the morning, took Jake's boat, and tried to blame him." Karen's knuckles whitened as she gripped the podium, her eyes darting between familiar faces, searching for sympathy. "You don't understand. He made a fool of me. He ignored the rules, and you all let him." Mrs. Miller's gaze was kind, but unyielding. "Karen, you did this to yourself." The room fell silent. Karen's shoulders sagged as the papers slipped from her hands, scattering across the floor. Mrs. Miller turned to face the community. "All in favor of removing Karen as HOA president immediately, please raise your hands." Hands shot up around the room, firm and unhesitating, a collective "Ay!" echoing in the space that had once been Karen's domain. No hands rose in her defense. Karen's eyes widened as she saw the power she had gripped for 8 years crumble in an instant. Mrs. Miller nodded solemnly. "It's decided. Karen, you are removed as HOA president. Effective immediately." Karen opened her mouth, but no words came. She turned, her eyes catching Jake's calm, unwavering stare from the back of the room, a stare that held no gloating, just quiet finality. Karen lowered her gaze, stepping past neighbors who leaned away as she passed, out into the cool night air, the wind from the lake brushing against her skin, reminding her that the silence she once enforced now belonged to everyone else, not to her. The meeting ended, and the room filled with a hum of relieved laughter and soft conversations as neighbors hugged and shook hands, some smiling for the first time in months. Jake rose quietly, several residents approaching him, shaking his hand, patting him on the back. "Thank you, Jake," one whispered, "you helped us reclaim our home." Mrs. Miller stepped forward, her voice soft but full of gratitude. "Thank you for your patience, for showing us we could face this the right way." Meanwhile, Karen returned to her lakeside house, once her fortress, now just a hollow shell echoing with memories of a power that was gone. She stood in the dark, looking at the photo of Harold on the mantel, her voice a whisper only she could hear. "I was just trying to protect what we built." But Pine Lake had moved on, and Karen was now a ghost in a community finally free. Down by the dock, Jake stood in the moonlight, the gentle waves rocking Thunderbolt, the air crisp, the stars reflected on the water. He exhaled, the weight of months lifting as the lake whispered promises of a new chapter, one free of Karen's tyranny, one where Pine Lake could finally breathe again. Jake thought the worst was over when Karen lost her power, but Pine Lake's quiet was deceptive, the surface of the lake smooth while currents of old grudges swirled beneath. That week, neighbors enjoyed a newfound peace. Children's laughter returned to the docks. Families had evening barbecues without fear of clipboard patrols, and boats glided across the lake without the glare of Karen's binoculars from her window. Jake, standing by Thunderbolt, felt something he hadn't felt in months. Peace, a true exhale, the tension in his shoulders loosening each morning as he sipped coffee and watched the sunrise shimmer over the water. But Karen, sitting alone in her once commanding house, was not at peace. The community she had ruled now moved on without her, and each laugh she heard outside felt like an echo of her failure. She paced her living room, the floor creaking under the weight of her regret and anger, Harold's photo on the mantel watching silently, as if reminding her of everything she had lost, not just power but the purpose she had tied to it. She replayed every moment of the HOA meeting in her mind, the hands rising, the finality in Mrs. Miller's voice, the look in Jake's calm eyes that said it was over. But to Karen, it wasn't over. It couldn't be. Her mind twisted every peaceful sound outside into a mockery, every neighbor's wave a taunt, every child's laughter a reminder of her irrelevance. One afternoon, Karen found herself at the window again, staring at Jake's dock, watching Thunderbolt sway gently, the afternoon sun painting the lake gold. She whispered to herself, "He took everything." Her hands trembled as she clenched the curtain, rage mixing with desperation. She began writing letters, dozens of them, to the HOA board, to the county, to local agencies, spinning stories of noise violations, zoning infractions, environmental hazards. Each letter was a last attempt to reclaim control, to remind Pine Lake that she was still watching. But the letters were ignored. The new board under Mrs. Miller's guidance implemented a strict policy requiring documented evidence for any complaint. Karen's letters, devoid of proof, were quietly filed away unread, dismissed. This silence, this lack of power drove Karen deeper into obsession. Jake, meanwhile, was moving forward, using his mornings to tune Thunderbolt, helping neighbors with small repairs, and teaching kids about boats and water safety. His once solitary life had opened, the community embracing him not just as the man who stood up to Karen, but as a neighbor they could trust, a friend. Yet Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done, that the calm was too perfect, too complete. Sam, now living across the lake in Karen's old house, shared the same concerns. "Jake, people like her don't just disappear. She's planning something." Jake nodded, his eyes drifting to the lake. "Let her try. We're ready this time." That readiness would soon be tested. One quiet evening, as Jake was securing Thunderbolt after a sunset ride, he found a small envelope taped to the steering wheel. His name, written in Karen's meticulous handwriting, sent a chill down his spine. He opened it carefully, finding a single sentence inside. "You think this is over, but it's not." There was no signature, but it didn't need one. Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't panic. He called Sam immediately, reading the note over the phone. Sam sighed. "She's testing the waters, seeing if she can scare you." Jake folded the note, sliding it into his back pocket. "She can't." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch, the lake shimmering under the moonlight, Thunderbolt rocking gently, a silent promise of freedom. He thought of Karen alone in her house, spiraling in her bitterness, unable to let go. And he thought of Pine Lake, the community that had reclaimed its peace, now under threat again. He wasn't afraid, but he was ready. The soft breeze carried the scent of the lake, the distant sound of an owl calling from the trees, the world around him alive and calm. But in that calm, Jake felt the storm brewing, the sense that Karen's desperation would lead her to one final act. Something reckless, something that could shatter the peace Pine Lake had fought so hard to reclaim. In that moment, Jake made a silent promise, not just to himself but to the community that had placed its trust in him. "Whatever she's planning, I'll be ready." As he stood, looking out over the water, the moon reflecting in the ripples, Jake felt a resolve settle in his bones, a quiet determination that no matter what Karen did next, she would not win. Pine Lake was his home, and he would protect it. The wind shifted, a cool breeze brushing past him as if carrying the whispers of the lake, reminding him of the battles already won, and the battles yet to come. Jake turned back toward his house, the note still in his pocket, Thunderbolt secure at the dock, the lights of Pine Lake glowing softly in the distance. He took one last look at the lake before stepping inside, the door closing behind him with a quiet click that echoed like a promise in the night. Whatever Karen was planning, she would have to face not just Jake, but the entire community she had once ruled. And this time, Pine Lake was ready. The next morning, Pine Lake shimmered under soft sunlight, small boats gliding over the mirrored water, children laughing on the docks, waves lapping gently like the calm heartbeat of a community finally at peace. But inside her aging house, Karen sat rigid at her window, her eyes fixed on Thunderbolt resting quietly by the dock, fingers clutching a cold cup of coffee, lips whispering words only she could hear. "They think they can get rid of me. They'll see." Karen had spent the night crafting what she believed was her masterstroke, no longer content with anonymous complaints or petty letters. She would make a move so big Pine Lake would never forget her, and Jake would pay for stripping away her power and respect. Her plan began with rummaging through every old file, every email, every blurred photograph and message she had ever sent or received in the past years, gathering them into a single black briefcase, her weapon for the final battle. That afternoon, While Jake was checking the mooring ropes on Thunderbolt, he saw Karen step out of her house, clutching that black briefcase with a chillingly calm look in her eyes. He watched, a cold prickle of intuition creeping up his spine. He called Sam immediately. Karen just left her house with a case of documents. She's up to something. Sam, already patrolling near Pine Lake, replied, "I'll keep an eye on her. Stay calm, Jake." Karen drove to the county legal office, a place she once frequented with Harold when they managed their affairs, a place she believed still owed her some measure of respect. She demanded a meeting, slammed the black briefcase on the desk, and declared she was a victim of systematic harassment by Jake Mitchell, who had orchestrated a conspiracy to overthrow her HOA presidency and endanger the safety of Pine Lake. The young lawyer, unfamiliar with Karen's history, flipped through the disjointed photos, misaligned papers, and fragmented emails with growing confusion. He recognized the hallmarks of a frivolous complaint, but Karen's steely voice cut through his hesitation. "You either help me, or I'll handle it myself." She didn't wait for a reply. Karen left the office convinced she had set the wheels of a legal war in motion. Returning home, she paced, her eyes darting to the lake where Thunderbolt rocked peacefully. Waiting for the day she believed Jake would receive his summons, waiting for neighbors to look at him with fear and shame, waiting for Pine Lake to kneel before her authority again. But Pine Lake was no longer under her shadow. The next morning, Sam arrived at Jake's door with a tired but amused smile. "The young lawyer Karen went to see called me. She tried to launch a lawsuit against you, but he declined after seeing her evidence. She's spiraling, Jake." Jake exhaled, glancing at Thunderbolt. She doesn't realize the community doesn't fear her anymore. But Karen didn't stop. She believed if no one would help, she would take matters into her own hands. That night, Karen crept toward the dock once again, flashlight and old camcorder in hand, determined to record a shocking exposé on Jake's supposed violations. She would upload it, force the HOA to see her worth, force Jake to crumble. As she turned on the camcorder, the flashlight's beam swept over Thunderbolt's control console, where Jake had left a small laminated sign. "Thank you, Karen, for reminding us to respect the rules. Pine Lake is more peaceful because of you." It was a gentle message, but it struck Karen like a slap across the face. Her hands trembled. The flashlight fell into the water with a splash that echoed in the quiet night. She screamed into the darkness, "I won't let you mock me!" She raised the camcorder, hand shaking, eyes wild, trying to record, but her breathing was ragged, her voice breaking into sobs of rage. Jake, watching from his balcony through the security camera feed on his phone, saw it all. He didn't smile, nor did he feel anger, only a deep, exhausted sadness. He knew people like Karen never stopped until they destroyed themselves, and he knew the final confrontation was coming, a confrontation that would decide not just the fate of Thunderbolt, but the peace of Pine Lake once and for all. Karen sat alone in her dimly lit living room, staring at the HOA petition that called for her removal. Her hands trembled as she clutched a glass of wine, eyes scanning the signatures of neighbors she had once thought respected her, feared her, obeyed her. Now, they wanted her gone. Outside, the moonlight shimmered over Pine Lake, reflecting off Jake's boat, Thunderbolt, docked neatly as always. To Karen, it wasn't just a boat, it was a symbol of defiance, of a neighbor who dared challenge her authority. Every morning when Jake's boat engine roared to life, it was a reminder that her control over Pine Lake was slipping. "I have to fix this," she whispered to the empty room, Harold's photo watching silently from the mantel. "They need to see that I was right about him." Fueled by desperation and the warmth of wine, Karen slipped into black clothes, stuffing her backpack with a flashlight, a cheap camera, and a bag of flour she intended to plant on the boat as evidence of Jake's supposed wrongdoing. Her plan was simple in her mind: prove Jake was hiding something, reclaim her authority, and silence the petition. She crept along the shoreline at midnight, her shoes sinking into the damp soil as she approached Thunderbolt. The cameras Jake had installed captured every step, but Karen didn't know, or maybe she didn't care anymore. With shaking hands, she found the spare key on the boat seat. "Too easy," she muttered, slipping it into the ignition. The engine roared to life, echoing across the silent lake. For a moment, Karen felt powerful, alive, in control again. She pushed the throttle, guiding Thunderbolt into the open water, the wind rushing against her face as the boat skimmed across Pine Lake at 45 mph. She was laughing now, screaming into the wind, imagining the panic Jake would feel waking up to find his precious boat gone. But she didn't know Jake was watching the GPS tracker from a safe distance, Sam positioned nearby, waiting. At 1:27 a.m., Jake pressed the kill switch on his phone. Thunderbolt's engine cut instantly, leaving Karen stranded in the middle of the lake, the boat drifting quietly as her laughter turned into curses. The cold breeze sobered her quickly, fear creeping in as she realized the gravity of what she had done. In desperation, Karen dialed 911, her voice shaking as she claimed, "My neighbor sabotaged me, left me stranded. He's been harassing me, and now he's trying to hurt me." The absurdity of it all was almost cinematic. Karen, the neighborhood tyrant, now calling for help from the very people she'd spent years manipulating. Sam arrived in his patrol boat, lights reflecting off the water, as he found Karen clutching the wheel, her eyes wide, her voice trembling as she repeated her lies. "Jake gave me permission," she insisted. "We had an arrangement." Sam kept his voice calm, asking for details she couldn't provide, noting every contradiction as she stumbled over her words. Meanwhile, Jake returned from his safe location, stepping onto the dock as Karen was escorted back to shore. In the station, Karen sat in the interview room, the weight of her actions finally sinking in. She tried to maintain her story, but when Sam played the security footage, her sneaking onto the boat, laughing as she sped off, rummaging through Jake's belongings, her face drained of color. "Karen," Jake said softly, "I never wanted this. You did this to yourself." The trial was swift. The judge, unimpressed by Karen's shifting stories, handed down a sentence: 6 months suspended jail time, 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, a lifetime ban from HOA leadership, and a restraining order preventing her from contacting Jake or coming near his property. As Karen walked out of the courtroom, the weight of humiliation and defeat hung over her. Pine Lake, once her kingdom, had turned its back on her. Meanwhile, Pine Lake began to heal. Miller, the new HOA president, replaced fear with community events and neighborly kindness. Jake resumed his peaceful morning boat rides, kids waving from docks, parents smiling gratefully as the lake returned to the serene place it was meant to be. Karen eventually moved away, selling her house below market value, starting over in a small apartment far from Pine Lake, far from the power she once craved. Thunderbolt once again sliced across the lake each morning, the sun rising over calm water, as Pine Lake embraced its new chapter of peace and true community, free from the shadow of HOA Karen. As the sun rose over Pine Lake that morning, I stood on the dock, the breeze carrying the crisp scent of water and pine, watching Thunderbolt glide softly across the glassy surface. Neighbors waved from their porches, kids' laughter carried across the water, and for the first time in many months, our neighborhood felt like a true community again. Free from fear, free from unnecessary conflict. It's strange how one person's obsession with control can cast a shadow over so many lives, but even stranger how a community can choose courage over fear, truth over threats. Pine Lake didn't just survive the chaos under HOA Karen's reign, it emerged stronger, more connected, and more grateful for the peace we'd reclaimed together. As I piloted Thunderbolt back toward the dock, I realized that storms in life teach us to appreciate the calm that follows. Home should be a place of peace. A good neighbor is worth more than a perfectly trimmed lawn, and standing up to bullies, no matter how small or local, can lead to changes that last a lifetime. If you've ever found yourself in a situation like this, feeling alone against someone abusing their power, I hope this story reminds you stay calm, document everything, and trust in the power of truth. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. If it resonated with you, please hit the like button to support the channel. Drop your thoughts or share your own neighbor's stories in the comments below, and subscribe so you don't miss the next real-life story that could inspire you to stand your ground and reclaim your peace. Take care of yourself, and always remember, you deserve a peaceful home and you deserve to live without fear. See you in the next story.